It's the summer of 1938, and just last March, Germany had annexed the country of Austria. And while there were many that welcomed the new rule and the new union of the two nations, who didn't generally welcome this were the Jewish population, who suddenly found a whole bunch of restrictions placed upon them, which would slowly increase in severity until they would start, well, disappearing. It was a dark time to be Jewish, as well as other social undesirables, such as the Romani. But one Jewish man, a Dr. Eduard Bloch, found himself in an odd predicament. He was 66 years old, not really cut out for armed resistance, but he was able to convince the leader of Germany at the time, Adolf Hitler, to assist him and his family in escaping from Austria. And Hitler agreed. Now, wait. Hold the phone. That's just the what? Why would... Okay, that's not really the person we'd expect to be helpful in a situation like this. He was one of the ones directly responsible for it? Like, why would Hitler, of all people, help a Jew? Like, he hated Jews. That was like the whole thing. Well, Bloch was a special case. So special to Hitler and his own history that he would embrace one of the last remaining shreds of humanity he had left and help save Bloch and his family from the horror show that he would be instrumental in causing. To properly explain this, we have to go way back in time to Hitler's childhood, as well as the relationship with his parents, Alois and Klara Hitler. Now, young Adolf's upbringing was kind of bipolar in a way, mostly because his father, Alois, was a bitter old fart who had no interest in actually being a dad, and while he did support the family financially, that was pretty much all he was good for. Otherwise, he would just be a jerk to his wife and kids, and punish young Hitler severely. I think all of us YouTube historians are now contractually obligated to make that joke when it comes up. However, on the flip side, Klara, Hitler's mom, was actually sweet as pie, and treated her children, including Adolf, warmly, as best she could, helping to shield them from their father's wrath. While Alois insisted Adolf do what he told him to do, Klara was far more willing to encourage Hitler to embrace his own interests. At the time, it was art. Hitler was an artist, and in his early days had no interest in getting into, politics. He just wanted to paint, and even go to art school one day. Klara encouraged him to pursue this, even though his father disapproved. Eventually, his father would pass away, and while he was sad that his father had died because he had only ever wanted the old man's approval, he still had his mother. And according to Hitler himself, while he honored his father, he loved his mother. He appreciated and respected her, which is why it was absolutely devastating when in 1906, she would discover a lump in her breast. Initially, she ignored it, but she started getting pain, so she consulted the family's doctor, Dr. Eduard Bloch. Adolf was alongside her when Bloch realized that she indeed had breast cancer, which is a pretty serious diagnosis even now, but back then there were very, very few treatment options. He would inform the young Adolf about this, leaving it to him to inform his mother in the best way he could, explaining that he thought the only real chance at living was to undergo a mastectomy. Klara, all things considered, took the news well, mostly because she was a devoutly religious woman. She was Catholic, and believed that whatever would happen to her, whether she lived or died from this, was God's will. She was not the kind of person that complained about the lot she got in life. She simply chose to live her life as best she could. She did undergo the mastectomy, but sadly, the surgeon, named Karl Urban, realized that the cancer had already metastasized, meaning that they basically had no treatment options whatsoever beyond that point. When Bloch heard the news, he would directly inform the family that her condition was terminal, and there wasn't much else he was able to do for her beyond trying to make her as comfortable as he could. At this point in time, Adolf was in Vienna to pursue his art, but he would move back home when he found out how serious his mother's condition was, along with his other siblings. Klara's condition was rapidly declining. Adolf, who was desperate to save his mother, begged Dr. Bloch to try anything, something. Was there any kind of experimental treatment they could do? And Bloch said, yes, there was something, but it was a poorly understood idea. And again, very experimental. Iodoform, which was normally used as an antiseptic back then, but at the time they were experimenting with using it as what was effectively a primitive chemotherapy. The procedure involved reopening Klara's surgical incisions and putting massive doses of iodoform-soaked gauze directly to the tissue to, well, burn the cancer cells and kill them. The problem with the procedure was not only was it not nearly as effective as modern stuff, as you can imagine, but it was also ridiculously painful. And in the end, it just didn't work. It would eventually cause Klara to have a paralyzed throat, leaving her unable to swallow, and she'd die at home in Linz, likely from the toxic side effects of the iodoform, on December 21st, 1907. Adolf, in particular, was devastated by this. He would never, ever get over the loss of his mother. But he always appreciated Dr. Bloch. He had been a good doctor who did his best with the medical knowledge that existed at the time. It wasn't enough to save Klara, but that hadn't been Bloch's fault, and Bloch was known to be a kind, patient, and good doctor. Bloch had made a habit of being incredibly generous when it came to his services towards the family. After the death of his father, they'd struggled somewhat financially, and Bloch had charged them reduced rates, sometimes accepting no money at all for helping. Adolf would later write Bloch a postcard assuring him of his gratitude and reverence, and even sent him some handmade gifts. This is something that Bloch remembered much later, when, Austria was annexed by Hitler's Nazi party, and, he was like, wait, I know that guy. What the heck happened? After he was forced to close his medical practice on October 1st, 1938, again due to the restrictions and the whole SS thing, and the Gestapo thing, and the concern for your life thing, a desperate Bloch, who no longer had a means to financially support himself, wrote Hitler directly, hoping that the dude might remember, hey, you really appreciated me back then. Has that changed? Good buddy? Good pal? Well, as it turns out, it hadn't changed. Hitler remembered Bloch, and remembered what he had done for his family, specifically for his mother, likely one of the few people on the planet that Hitler had ever truly loved. So Adolf would directly order that Bloch and his family were to be placed under special protection by the Gestapo.
Knock, knock. Who's there? We will ask the questions!
Okay, that sounds really sinister in this context. Like, yes, you will be under special protection. No. But it was actually genuine. The Gestapo were told under no uncertain circumstances that this man and his family were not to be touched and to be protected, legitimately protected by them. Not spirited away, not magically disappear one night. No. This dude was allowed to not die. He was in fact the only Jew in Linz with that particular status, and he was allowed to stay in his house with his wife until they could work out exactly how to get him out of the country. Because, in order to go along with the whole Nazi thing, they couldn't just let him stay there. But Hitler also didn't want this man to die. So, they were trying to get him out of Austria, particularly to the United States, where he would be safe. Bloch was permitted to sell his house at market value, which was absolutely not normal for a Jew at that time. Usually Jews had their property seized, or if they were allowed to sell it, at a significant loss. But Bloch was allowed to sell his home, at the normal price, and they were permitted to take the equivalent of 16 Reichsmark out of the country, when other Jews were only permitted to take 10. In 1940, Bloch would leave Austria and settled over in New York City, specifically the Bronx. though he still wasn't able to start practicing medicine again because his medical degree from Austria-Hungary wasn't recognized in America at that time, and he was, well, too old to go through the motions of getting it again. Still, he was somewhat taken care of, mostly because of his interest to American authorities, the OSS specifically, or the Office of Strategic Services, which was a predecessor to the modern-day CIA. Basically, they had a man here who knew Hitler, and knew Hitler when he was young, and the whole know thy enemy thing is relevant. They were hoping Bloch could fill them in regarding Adolf's past, his childhood, and things that could help them, possibly shoot him. Though Bloch didn't have much to offer in the way of that, but he could tell them what he was like as a kid. In 1941 and 1943, Bloch was interviewed by the OSS regarding Hitler, and he was the one who explained that Adolf's most striking feature was his love for his mother. It had been clear to him early on that Hitler adored his mom, and he admitted it was easy to see why, because he remembered Klara as just the nicest woman you could ever possibly meet. She was warm, loving, and polite, and was very sweet to her children. Bloch didn't think there was anything pathological or psychological or, medical when it came to his love for his mom. There was no Oedipus complex going on here. His mom was just the one parent who showed him affection, so he loved her, as any kid would. He also remembered that Adolf was, and I quote, the saddest man I had ever seen, when Bloch had told him about how his mother was going to die. As I mentioned earlier, the death of his mom affected Adolf deeply, and he was never able to really get over it. When the OSS interview asked Bloch what he thought Klara would think about what Hitler was doing these days, he admitted that when it came to her, she would likely turn over in her grave, if she knew. Klara just wasn't the kind of person that would endorse any of what Adolf became. It was the exact opposite of what she wanted for him. Remember, she encouraged his art. But that's not what wound up happening. But beyond that, the authorities quickly realized there wasn't much to be gained from Bloch. He was a nice enough guy, but in terms of strategic value, he had little to offer. And he also wouldn't live much longer himself either. He would get stomach cancer, and die from that in 1945 at the age of 73, just a month after Hitler himself died. And so ends a perplexing tale from World War II. It's just odd to think about. I mean, Dr. Bloch was a Jew. That was like the whole thing with the, destroying an entire population of people and committing unspeakable horrors and genocide. And you think the main voice behind that might not be down with helping, someone he saw as the enemy out. But the thing about people is that people are complicated. And on occasion, rarely, but on occasion, the worst of humanity will sometimes do the right thing. Now, to be clear, his saving Dr. Bloch and his family does not, excuse any of what happened. Not at all. There's no way. But it is an interesting story. An interesting element of history. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.